Welcome back, folks. It has definitely been a while since we have hung out together for a spooky story, so really looking forward to it for today. Audio only for this one because we are firmly in the time of year where it is entirely too hot for me to put up my full setup with the background and the lights, and I have to turn off the fans and the air conditioner in the background so that the audio of all of that doesn't get picked up. And it just makes it a bit of a miserable time for me. So we're going to forego that today, and it will be audio only. Now, before I get into the actual reading, just the usual warnings that these are old stories that sometimes have attitudes about race, gender, religion, whatever you can think of, that are quite rightly distasteful to modern listeners. And if that doesn't sound quite like your cup of tea, feel free to duck out now and not consume this content. In addition, we do read a lot of spooky stuff on this channel, which means that a lot of spooky things have their origins in less than pleasant circumstances. So, a general content warning for all things macabre, spooky, and sometimes a little bit gross, distasteful, all kinds of potential horribleness, and I will let you make your own decisions. But of course, the name of the story that I'm reading, as always, is the video title, so you can always look it up and make the choice for yourself. And again, if it doesn't sound like your cup of tea, feel free to not consume this content. So, what are we going to read together today? Well, originally I wanted to read a short story called A Jury of Her Peers, which is very, very good. And if you've never read it, I urge you to give it a chance. It is very, very good. I quite like it. It is sad and a bit disturbing, not for the usual reasons things are on this channel, but still very, very interesting. I'm having a bit of trouble with figuring out how and if I do it on this channel, though, just because most of it is actually dialogue. In fact, it's often, or not often, it is sometimes, it has been in the past performed as a play, actually, and I'm not really sure how well that much dialogue would translate into just me reading it aloud. So I'm going to put that one off, but I would love to find a way to read that for you that didn't seem very stilted and odd sometime in the future. So what are we reading, if not A Jury of Her Peers, which you should read. You should definitely go and read it. We are going to be reading a classic by none other than Bram Stoker, who you probably don't need me to introduce to you, but if you do, Bram Stoker is, of course, the 19th century Irish author who wrote Dracula. I'm not reading Dracula for you, though. That's a little too long for me. I've never even thought about trying to read an entire novel. It seems like the kind of thing I would get bored of very, very quickly, but we'll see. I won't totally eliminate it as a possibility for future videos. But what we're reading today is Bram Stoker's The Judge's House, which again, it's a classic. I know lots of other people have read it, but hey, it's a fun story, and I think you will quite like it. So off we go with The Judge's House by Bram Stoker. If you hear crunching noises in the background, that is my cat, and he is crunching away on some kibbles. He's also very upset that I won't let him out into the hallway. He might be crying. I apologize. So here we go, The Judge's House. When the time came for his examination... Pardon me, I've already flubbed it. I do apologize. When the time for his examinations drew near, Malcolm Malcolmson is our protagonist. If you're a parent and that's how you name your kid, are you even trying? Like, come on, is this the kid you don't like? Made up his mind to go somewhere to read by himself. That's pretty common for students. I remember doing that. He feared the attractions of the seaside, and also he feared completely rural isolation. for of old he knew its charms, and so he determined to find some unpretentious little town where there would be nothing to distract him. Oh, okay. Feared as in he was worried he'll start having fun and get distracted. Not he's like afraid of the seaside, which I know some people are afraid of the sea, but I that went in a different direction than what I was expecting. He refrained from asking suggestions from any of his friends, for he argued that each would recommend some place of which he had knowledge, and where he had already acquaintances. As Malcolmson wished to avoid friends, he had no wish to encumber himself with the attention of friends' friends, and so he determined to look out for a place for himself. He packed a portmanteau with some clothes and all the books he required, and then took a ticket for the first name on the local timetable, which he did not know. Must be nice to have all the privilege of a 19th century white guy where you can just turn up in a small town that you don't know and assume that you're going to be reasonably safe. When at the end of 3 hours' journey he alighted at Benchurch, he felt satisfied that he had so far obliterated his tracks as to be sure of having a peaceful opportunity of pursuing his studies. Fair enough. He went straight to the one inn which the sleepy little place contained and put up for the night. Benchurch was a market town, and once in 3 weeks was crowded to excess, but for the remainder of the 21 days it was as attractive as a desert. I mean, some people really like desert landscapes, you don't know. Malcolmson looked around the day. Pardon me. Sorry, my throat is getting very dried out. There we go. Malcolmson looked around the day after his arrival to try to find quarters more isolated than even so quiet an inn as the Good Traveller afforded. That's kind of a cool name for an inn, actually. There was only one place which took his fancy, and it certainly satisfied his wildest ideas regarding quiet. In fact, quiet was not the proper word to apply to it. Desolation was the only term conveying any suitable idea of its isolation. It was an old, rambling, heavy-built house of the Jacobean style, with heavy gables and windows, unusually small, and set higher than was customary in such houses, and was surrounded with a high brick wall massively built. Indeed, on examination, it looked more like a fortified house than an ordinary dwelling. That actually does sound really cool. I would vacation there. But all these things pleased Malcolmson. Here, he thought, is the very spot I have been looking for, and if I can only get opportunity of using it, I shall be happy. His joy was increased when he realized beyond doubt that it was not at present inhabited. From the post office he got the name of the agent, who was rarely surprised at the application to rent a part of the old house, meaning he was surprised that somebody actually wanted to rent it. Mr. Carnford, the local lawyer and agent, was a genial old gentleman, and frankly confessed his delight at anyone being willing to live in the old house. "To tell you the truth," said he, "I should be only too happy on behalf of the owners to let anyone have the house rent-free for a term of years, if only to accustom the people here to see it inhabited." Wow. There is a rental market I would love to get in on. Geez. I'll live in your creepy, weird, fortified old house for free, just so people can get used to it. Good God. It has been so long empty that some kind of absurd prejudice has grown up about it. Yeah, I bet I can guess what. And this can be best put down by its occupation. If only, he added with a sly glance at Malcolmson, by a scholar like yourself, who wants it quiet for a time. Malcolmson thought it needless to ask the agent about the absurd prejudice. He knew he would get more information, if he should require it, on the subject from other quarters. He paid his 3 months' rent, got a receipt, and the name of an old woman who would probably undertake to do for him, meaning like clean up and stuff, and came away with the keys in his pocket. He then went to the landlady of the inn, who was a cheerful and most kindly person, and asked her advice as to such stores and provisions as he would be likely to require. She threw up her hands in amazement when he told her where he was going to settle himself. "Not in the judge's house," she said, and grew pale as she spoke. He explained the locality of the house, saying that he did not know its name. And when he had finished, she answered, "Aye, sure enough, the very place. It is the judge's house, sure enough." He asked her to tell him about the place, why so called, and what there was against it. She told him that it was so called locally because it had been many years before, how long she could not say, as she was herself from another part of the country, but she thought it must have been 100 years or more, the abode of a judge who was held in great terror on account of his harsh sentences and his hostility to prisoners at assizes. As to what there was against the house itself, she could not tell. She had often asked, but no one could inform her, but there was a general feeling that there was something, and for her own part she would not take all the money in Drinkwater's bank and stay in the house an hour by herself. Then she apologized to Malcolmson for her disturbing talk. "It is too bad of me, sir, and you, and a young gentleman too, if you will pardon me saying it, going to live there all alone. If you were my boy, and you'll excuse me for saying it, you wouldn't sleep there a night, not if I had to go there myself and pull the big alarm bell that's on the roof." The good creature was so manifestly in earnest and was so kindly in her intentions that Malcolmson, although amused, was touched. He told her kindly how much he appreciated her interest in him, and added, "But my dear Mrs. Witham, indeed you could not be concerned about me. You need not be concerned about me. A man who is reading for the mathematical tripos, I don't know, I don't like math, so that sounds terrible to me, has too much to think of to be disturbed by any kind of these mysterious somethings. And his work is of too exact and prosaic a kind to allow of his having any corner in his mind for mysteries of any kind. Oh my God, we have a long list of mathematical things that I don't know what they are or understand and will probably misread. Harmonical progression, which I had better be the study of harmonicas. I know it's not, but it would be better if it was. Permutations and combinations and elliptic functions have sufficient mysteries for me. Sounds terrible. I'd rather have the ghosts. Mrs. Witham kindly undertook to see after his commissions, and he went himself to look for the old woman who had been recommended to him. When he returned to the judge's house with her, after an interval of a couple of hours, he found Mrs. Witham herself waiting with several men and boys carrying parcels, and an upholsterer's man with a bed in a cart. For she said, though tables and chairs might all be very well, a bed that hasn't been aired mayhap 50 years was not proper for young bones to lie in. I don't think I'd want to sleep in a bed that hadn't been used in 50 years either, especially in a shut-up house. It's probably all dusty and gross. Not enough reactin' in the world. She was evidently curious to see the inside of the house, and though manifestly so afraid of the somethings that at the slightest sound she clutched onto Malcolmson, whom she never left for a moment, went over the whole place. After his examination of the house, Malcolmson decided to take up his abode in the great dining room, which is big enough to serve for all his requirements. And Mrs. Witham, with the aid of the charwoman, Mrs. Dempster, who went on to make a fortune in the bread business, no doubt, proceeded to arrange matters. When the hampers were brought in and unpacked, Malcolmson saw that with much kind of forethought she had sent from her own kitchen sufficient provisions to last for a few days. Before going, she expressed all sorts of kind wishes, and at the door turned and said, "And perhaps, sir, as the room is big and draughty, it might be well to have one of those big screens put round your bed at night, though, truth to tell, I would die myself if I were to be so shut in with all kinds of things that put their heads round the sides or over the top and look in on me." The image which she had called up was too much for her nerves, and she fled incontinently. I'm assuming that sometimes has a different meaning from the one that I know. Mrs. Dempster sniffed in a superior manner as the landlady disappeared, and remarked that for her own part she wasn't afraid of all the bogies in the kingdom. I think that's how that's pronounced. Bogies? Boogies? We'll go with bogies, whatever. "I'll tell you what it is, sir," she said. "Bogies is all kinds and all sorts of things, except bogies. Rats and mice and beetles and creaky doors and loose slates and broken panes and stiff drawer handles that stay out when you pull them and then fall down in the middle of the night. Look at the wainscot of the room. It is old, hundreds of years old. Do you think there's no rats and beetles there? And do you imagine, sir, that you won't see none of them? Rats is bogies, I tell you, and bogies is rats, and don't you get to think anything else." "Mrs. Dempster," said Malcolmson gravely, making her a polite bow, "you know more than a senior wrangler, and let me say that as a mark of esteem for your indubitably... Oh my gosh. Let me try that again. And let me say that, as a mark of esteem for your indubitable soundness of head and heart, I shall, when I go, give you possession of this house and let you stay here by yourself for the last 2 months of my tenancy, for 4 weeks will serve my purpose." "Thank you kindly, sir," she answered, "but I couldn't sleep away from home a night. I am in greenhouse charity, and if I sleep a night away from my rooms, I shall lose all I have got to live on. The rules is very strict, and there's too many watching for a vacancy for me to run any risks in the matter. Only for that, sir, I'd gladly come here and attend on you altogether during your stay." So she lives in some sort of house or dormitory that is a form of local charity. And if you apparently don't stay there every night, they give your place to someone else. Which seems a bit harsh, given that, sometimes life happens, but whatever. "My good woman," said Malcolmson hastily, "I have come here on purpose to obtain solitude, and believe me that I am grateful to the late Greenhow for having so organized his admirable charity, whatever it is, that I am perforce denied the opportunity of suffering from such a form of temptation. Saint Anthony himself could not be more rigid on the point." The old woman laughed harshly. "Ah, you young gentlemen," she said, "you don't fear for nowt, and belike you'll get all the solitude you want here." She's probably not wrong. Sounds like the kind of place lots of people are afraid to get too close to. She set to work with her cleaning, and by nightfall, when Malcolmson returned from his walk, he always had one of his books to study as he walked. It'd be funny if you, fell in a hole, like in cartoons. Nobody writes that into these sorts of novels. I guess it would break up the dramatic tension if we started Looney Tunesing it all over the place with characters. He found the room swept and tidied, a fire burning in the old hearth, the lamp lit, and the table spread for supper, with Mrs. Witham's excellent fare. "This is comfort indeed," he said, as he rubbed his hands. When he had finished his supper and lifted the tray to the other end of the great oak dining table, he got out his books again and put fresh wood on the fire, trimmed his lamp, and set himself down to a spell of real hard work. He went on without pause till around 11 o'clock, when he knocked off for a bit to fix his fire and lamp, and to make himself a cup of tea. He had always been a tea drinker, same, and during his college life had sat late at work and had taken tea late. The rest was a great luxury to him, and he enjoyed it with a sense of delicious, voluptuous ease. The renewed fire leaped and sparkled and threw quaint shadows through the great old room. And as he sipped his hot tea, he reveled in the sense of isolation from his kind. Then it was that he began to notice, for the first time, what a noise the rats were making. Surely, he thought, they cannot have been at it all the time I was reading. Had they been, I must have noticed it. Presently, when the noise increased, he satisfied himself that it was really new. It was evident that at first the rats had been frightened at the presence of a stranger and the light of a fire and lamp, but that as the time went on they had grown bolder and were now disporting themselves as was their wont. For a lot of people, it's already a horror story with all the rats and stuff. I actually don't mind them myself, or mice. Not that I'd want to live with an infestation or anything, but just the concept of them doesn't bother me the way it does some people. How busy they were, and hark to the strange noises up and down behind the old wainscot, over the ceiling and under the floor as they raced and gnawed and scratched. Malcolmson smiled to himself as he recalled to mind the saying of Mrs. Dempster, "Bogies is rats and rats is bogies." The tea began to have its effect of intellectual and nervous stimulus. He saw with joy another long spell of work to be done before the night was past, and in the sense of security which it gave him, he allowed himself the luxury of a good look round the room. He took his lamp in one hand and went all around, wondering that so quaint and beautiful an old house had been so long neglected. The carving of the oak on the panels of the wainscot was fine, and on and around the doors and windows it was beautiful and of rare merit. There were some old pictures on the walls, but they were coated so thick with dust and dirt that he could not distinguish any detail of them, though he held his lamp as high as he could over his head. Here and there, as he went round, he saw some crack or hole blocked for a moment by the face of a rat with its bright eyes glittering in the light. But in an instant it was gone, and a squeak and a scamper followed. The thing that most struck him, however, was the rope of the great alarm bell on the roof, which hung down in the corner of the room on the right-hand side of the fireplace. He pulled up close to the hearth with a great high-back carved oak chair, and sat down to his last cup of tea. I couldn't be drinking tea this late. I'd be peeing all night. And awake all night. When this was done, he made up the fire and went back to his work, sitting at the corner of the table, having the fire to his left. For a while the rats disturbed him somewhat with their perpetual scampering, but he got accustomed to the noise as one does to the ticking of a clock or to the roar of moving water. And he became so immersed in his work that everything in the world, except the problem which he was trying to solve, passed away from him. He suddenly looked up. His problem was still unsolved. I wouldn't be able to solve any of them, so no judgment here. And there was in the air that sense of the hour before dawn, which is so dread to doubtful life. The noise of the rats had ceased. Indeed, it seemed to him that it must have ceased but lately, and that it was the sudden cessation which had disturbed him. The fire had fallen low, but still it threw out a deep red glow. As he looked, he started in spite of his sang-froid. Pardon my terrible French, it's been so long. There, on the great high-back carved oak chair by the right side of the fireplace, sat an enormous rat, steadily glaring at him with baleful eyes. He made a motion to it as though to hunt it away, but it did not stir. Then he made the motion of throwing something. Still it did not stir, but showed its great white teeth angrily, and its cruel eyes shone in the lamplight with an added vindictiveness. And that is where I will leave it this time with the judge's house. I don't want this to get too long, and it is a bit of a longer story. So thank you for choosing to spend some time with me today, and I hope you have enjoyed the first part of The Judge's House by Bram Stoker. I hope you and your loved ones are safe and well, and that you are enjoying the summer where you are. And I'll see you again here soon, folks, for more of this story. Bye for now.